13 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 12 defense DST units. I'm ranking this week number 1, the Denver Broncos. So this week, a great matchup, Monday Night Football. Cleveland Browns coming to town. And I think Jameis Winston and this offense are going to play in the hands of the Denver Broncos. They get to the quarterback amongst the league leaders in sacks. They create turnovers. And when you got the best corner in the league in Patrick Surtain, things are going to happen and plays are going to be made defensively. So Jameis Winston, we know he's the ultimate gunslinger, but he does take a lot of sacks. And he does throw a decent amount of interceptions. And like I said, that's going to play into the hands of one of the best defenses in the league in Denver this week. Number 2, the Houston Texans. This week, a great matchup at the Jacksonville Jaguars. I know last week they did give up 32 points to the Tennessee Titans, but their defense still went out there. They created some turnovers. They found the end zone as well, was this Texan DST. And I know Trevor Lawrence possibly returning in this game, but it's going to be enough there without Christian Kirk. Gabe Davis out for the season, down to Brian Thomas and Evan Ingram in the passing game. And their offensive line hasn't been good, and Trevor Lawrence hasn't been good this season. So I think after a bad loss last week, Texans, they're going to take care of business in this week, and it's going to lead with the defense. Number 3, the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs this week, a great matchup versus the Vegas Raiders. Aiden O'Connell most likely starting at quarterback, and he possibly could be an upgrade over Gardner Minshew, but either way, this offense, I don't believe, is a great threat to Kansas City. I know the Chiefs' defense has definitely taken a step back, especially last week, where they gave up 27 points to a Carolina offense that just isn't that good. But this week, I think they buckled down. It's a home game. It's Black Friday. And like I said, this Vegas Raider offense has been one of the worst offenses all season long. Number 4, the Detroit Lions. Chicago coming to town. Caleb Williams last week finally had a nice performance, but this Bear offense all season long has been inconsistent. And Caleb Williams, he's been holding on to the football a lot this season, where he's taking big hits, he's taking sacks. And this week in a matchup at Detroit for the Chicago, I think this plays into Detroit's hands as well, where they could get off to an early start and start teeing off, even though last week we saw Minnesota get off to an early start versus Bear offense, and the Bears found their way back into the game and lost in overtime 30-27. But Detroit, their defense has played better over the last 3 weeks, and believe it or not, with Hutchinson not in the lineup, they've been giving up less points to teams. I know some of the matchups have been really lopsided, and they've versed some bad teams, not Tennessee and Jacksonville, over the last few weeks. But this Lion defense is coming into their zone, and this week, if they're off to an early start, I believe that's where they're going to do the damage in this one. Number 5, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the Bucs last week went into New York, had a great ball game, only gave up 7 points, got to Tommy DeVito a few times in that game. And this week, another good matchup at the Panthers. I know the Panthers' offense has definitely improved over the last few weeks since Bryce Young, believe it or not, has come back into the lineup. I think sitting on the bench, he learned some things with Bryce Young, and he's definitely picked up and played a little bit better. But this week, I think Tampa Bay in this division matchup, they go into Carolina, they're going to put points on the board early. And Tampa Bay, if they could play a similar type of game like they did last week, where I could definitely see it be a possibility, they could be one of the better defenses this week. Number 6, the Washington Commanders. So last week, Washington lost in a ball game they thought they were going to win. They were a big favorite, but the Cowboys came in, took care of business, and their defense definitely had lapses at times, was this Commander DST. But to be honest, most of Dallas's damage was on special teams, with a kick return touchdown and an onside kick return touchdown. So this week in a matchup versus Tennessee, that's coming off a great performance and a good victory, obviously, beating the Houston Texans, putting up 32 points in that game. I just don't see it in this one. The Commanders, obviously, they're free-falling a little bit, but I think their defense is going to get back to basics in this one. Will Levis is taking a lot of hits. He's thrown some interceptions, and I believe veteran quarterbacks who've had success versus defense more than these younger quarterbacks. I think Washington, after a bad loss and a heartbreaking loss last week, they buckled down on defense in this one, and Tennessee's amongst the top 5 teams in the league, giving up the most fantasy points to DSTs this season. Number 7, the Minnesota Vikings. So last week, they were off to a great start, was this DST, and then they fell apart in the second half of the ball game, where they blew a lead even though they held on and won in overtime. So Arizona coming to town. Obviously, they got a pretty solid offense. Kyler Murray, James Conner, Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison Jr. But there's times like last week we saw Kyler Murray just can't move the football down the field and make plays. And there's times they're not putting points on the board. So I believe Minnesota this week, after last week they almost blew that game and it was on the defense, they're going to go out there, they're going to play tougher. And they've been a better home defense than they've been on the road. And, you know, Robert Flores, he can be happy with the performance last week, and he's one of the better defensive minds in the league. Number 8, Dallas Cowboys. So the Dallas Cowboys, DST, it hasn't been a good year, and they were one of the top defenses taken off the board going into the season. But obviously, with Dan Quinn, not the defensive coordinator, I think it was a big hit and a big loss for this Dallas Cowboy team. And they lost a few players in free agency as well. But this week is a one-week streaming option and a great matchup versus the New York Giants, one of the worst offenses in the league. And now with Tommy DeVito on the center, I think Micah Parsons and this DST could get some pressure on DeVito in this game. We saw the special teams did score 2 touchdowns last week for this Dallas Cowboy team. And I believe this week in a division matchup and a team they've owned over the last 6-7 seasons is Dallas. They could go out there and have a good performance. Number 9, the Indianapolis Colts. So this Indianapolis Colts team, another DST I have as a streaming option this week. Their defense hasn't been great all season long, but this week it's a good matchup, no doubt about it. It's the New England Patriots, which is an offense that doesn't have a lot of threats. With Demario Douglas and Hunter Henry are your top 2 options, and no disrespect to those guys, but obviously they're not top options in an offense. If it's a good offense or even a decent offense, Drake May, I believe he could be a good quarterback, no doubt about it, in this league, but he's definitely had his turnover issues and he's taking big hits. I think Indianapolis in a grinded out type of ball game this weekend, New England could go in there, have a decent fantasy day. Number 10, the Seattle Seahawks. I know their defense has been great for the majority of the season with Seattle, but last week we saw them go out there. They had a great game versus the Arizona Cardinals, keeping them out of the end zone, winning 16-6. And going back to week 11, they had a comeback victory, beating the San Francisco 49ers and holding that offense down to 17 points. So this week they travel to the New York Jets. Obviously, Seattle, their playoff hopes are alive now for the Seattle team, winning 2 division games in a row. So this week at the New York Jets, I know the Jets are coming off the bye. I know a lot of things in the organization haven't been great for New York, and I think they could get to Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers is not 100% according to reports, and at 40 years old, we've seen him take a lot of big hits this season, and his interceptions have gone up. So I know the Jets have good weapons, Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, Breece Hall, but I think the Seattle Seahawks team, where they're trying to get into the playoffs, is going to go out there and try to win this one once again with the defense, even though we know they got good weapons offensively. So I think Rodgers is going to take a few sacks in this ball game. I think he's good for a turnover or 2. And like I said, the Seattle secondary the last couple weeks has gone out there, definitely improved, and they've been putting up fantasy points. Number 11, the Buffalo Bills. So the Bills coming off a bye week, coming off a big win in week 11, the only team to defeat the Kansas City Chiefs this season. And now San Francisco coming to town, and we'll see if Brock Purdy is going to play in this game. But I believe Brock Purdy is going to play for the San Francisco 49er team. But even with Purdy in the lineup, their scoring's been down for the majority of the season. So Buffalo, they played a good game, I thought. I know they gave up 21 points to Kansas City, but they made it tough on Patrick Mahomes. They caused a few turnovers and got to him in that ball game. And I think this week, Purdy or Allen, whoever's at quarterback for San Francisco, I think Buffalo could go out there and put in a decent performance. And the 12th and final defense, DST, I'm ranking this week is the Arizona Cardinals. So this is our Cardinal defense the last 2-3 weeks has gone out there and played good football. I know last week they lost 16-6, but that's a good offense, obviously, of the Seattle Seahawks. When you got guys like Kenneth Walker, Geno Smith having a good year quarterback, and then 2 great receivers in DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith, and the Jigba. But this week, Arizona travels to Minnesota. I know Sam Darnold's been playing great football, and this offense has really opened up since TJ Hawkinson returned to the lineup the last month of the season. But I believe Sam Darnold's due for one of these bad games. I know he's been a better player at home than he's been on the road this season. And like I said, the last 3 out of 4 games, Darnold has put up big numbers for this Minnesota Viking team. But Arizona has limited some good offenses, and I think this week they could surprise a little bit and finish in the top 12. So that's the top 12 defense DST units I'm ranking. That's the top 12 defense DST units I'm ranking for week 13 of the fantasy football season.